Greetings and salutations. I am Scojo in 360, and you are kind of witnessing history. You see, I'm putting to test a new lav mic, little microphone that I'm talking into. Most of the time I invest several $100s on these things. This one was like 12 bucks on Amazon. So if it sounds good, we may have just discovered a new low-cost solution, and I'll make a video about that later. But you know, if I was gonna drop several $100s on a lav mic every time I needed a lav mic, I wouldn't be able to afford that vacation to Burma. So I get the question all the time about frame rates and resolutions, and there's a lot of really technical stuff I could get into, but why don't we just go over the easy peasy lemon squeezy stuff. First of all, what the hell is a frame rate? Well, motion pictures are literally motion pictures. You're not getting this continuous stream. What you're doing is getting a photo and a photo and a photo and a photo and a photo, and we break that down and call it a frame rate. So how does that affect what you're shooting? The frame rates that are the most common, in America at least, are 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, and now emerging some 60 frames per second. Let me break down each one of those frame rates, and then you can decide which one is best for you. 24 frames is traditionally what we use for cinema. Back when movies were first getting started, that's literally how many photos were lined up per second. So that means 24 frames or photos per second. It comes with some artifacts that are actually somewhat pleasing to the eye, like motion blur, which you won't be able to see because I'm shooting this on 30 frames per second, but it adds kind of a nice cinematic sort of otherworldly characteristic to it. So that's what a lot of people that are in my business use, 24 frames per second. But if you're using an iPhone or anything that's going on TV, that's all going to be 30 frames per second. Now you don't get that motion blur, which can be good and can be bad, that you do in 24 frames per second, but 30 frames per second is generally what most smartphones shoot on, and it's kind of the standard for television these days. Much to the chagrin of some of us, some people are starting to use 60 frames per second in motion pictures. Like one of the Lord of the Rings movies was shot in 60 frames per second. Not sure if that was the best choice or not, but it is something that gives a lot more clarity. It almost makes it too real looking. When you want to have a nice visual story, you want it to almost seem otherworldly. So right now, stick with either 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second. If you're just shooting on your iPhone, it doesn't matter. You can just dismiss everything I just said because it's going to give you 30 frames per second. And of course, you're probably asking, well, how the hell do I even know what frame rate I shot? And well, the good news is that Premiere tells you how to do that. Let's go into the file that I've been working on for this Burning Man video, and I can show you exactly how you can find out what your frame rate is. It's really simple. All right, here we go. Remember, this is this video about Burning Man that we've been working on, and if you just go up to this corner right here, you see that 29.99, 29.97, that's essentially 30 frames per second. This was all shot on an iPhone, and that shoots at 30 frames per second. So all you got to do is go to this portion of your Premiere and you'll know exactly how many frames per second you have it. Now you can change 30 frames per second into 24, but that's a whole nother video. Let's just stick with the topic. Now, we're going to move on to resolutions because I've got a nice little perfect transfer in subject in. If you move your screen way over to right there, you see this? Okay, I've got 1920 by 1080, I've got 1280 by 720. What the hell are those? Those are called resolutions. What are resolutions? Well, the three most common are 720, 1080, and 4K. What the hell does that mean? Well, the first number basically refers to the amount of horizontal lines in the image, and then the second number is the amount of pixels wide that it is. Why does that matter? Because let's say going from a 720 shot film to a 1080, it makes the file size go up by about 2.5 times. So every time you go to a new resolution, the file sizes get bigger and bigger and bigger, which makes them harder to manage, but they also look a lot better. So in the case of 720, that is what we used to call HD. That was really the first thing that we used termed HD. It's still a very good resolution to shoot if it's just going to end up on the internet. 720 is not bad. Most of the people can't really tell the difference. So if you're just having fun and you're shooting around and you have the option to use 720, it will definitely save you some computer space. So use 720 if you're just getting started and you've got concerns about how much space is on either your iPhone that you're shooting on or on your computer. 1080 is sort of the standard these days for your television, for YouTube, for Facebook. That is the new HD standard, and that is 1920, that's the horizontal lines, by 1080, that's the pixels in width. Now the difference is that 1080 is about 2.5 times a larger file size, but it also looks a lot better. 4K, which is gorgeous, and you really should start shooting in 4K, is generally considered to be 3840 by 2160 or 4096 by 2160. Again, that's 4096 horizontal lines by 2160 pixels. Now, when you go into Premiere and you want to start a new sequence, let's go File, New, Sequence. Then all of a sudden you get all these different things you could choose from. See here on the left, we've got 1080, 24 frames per second, 1080, 25 frames per second, which is more popular in Europe, and we got 1080, 30 frames per second. Now let's go down to something like the red format. See, we've got 1080, we've got 4K, 4.5K. So the resolutions are something you can choose as you're setting up your sequence, or Premiere can just see what your footage is and make a sequence built around it. But it's good to know the difference between 720, 1080, and 4K. Hopefully we've got that to you today. Now you're a step ahead of everybody else. It's time to go make your magic. So to recap, 720 is a respectable resolution if you want to use something that's just going to end up on the internet, but you're likely going to put everything into 1080. 4K is how you should be shooting now because it's gorgeous, but everything will eventually end up in 1080. So start with 1080 as your principal, and if you're going to use a frame rate right now, I would say use 30 frames per second, but if you want to get more cinematic, a little bit more professional, try 24 frames per second. All right, that's the quick and dirty on resolution and frame rates. If you have any questions, be sure and leave them in the comment section below because I will address them and you may give me ideas for new videos. But that's what I'm also looking for. So leave me some comments about what you want to hear. This is an ongoing series, my lovely Premiere Pro for beginners. This is dedicated to y'all out there because you're attractive, you're lovely, and you've got a great personality. I am Skojo in 360. I am out of here. Such a dork.